Okay, so my name's Charlotte Tobitt. I'm the Chief Reporter at Press Gazette. I'm here with Lee Clayton, who is head of Talksport radio station. Hi Lee, thanks for joining us today.
Hello Charlotte.
Great, so we're here to talk about sort of how Talksport's dealing with the coronavirus crisis and how we're keeping going and keeping broadcasting. So I thought we could just start by asking you sort of when all this really started to roll and happen, and gradually sports events around the world were being cancelled and postponed, and then about 2.5 weeks ago in the UK that really started to happen. Sort of as this was happening, what was going through your head as the head of the sports-focused radio station?
Well, obviously these are unprecedented times. I wasn't quite sure what to expect. We were trying to grasp hold of any live sport that was going on. We had Irish horse racing briefly. That didn't last for very long. Obviously, we were in the midst of Cheltenham, and there was a great talking point about whether or not that should continue, and that's a pretty big week for us. So we were there covering that. But I'm sure you know the origin of Talksport. Many years ago, when I was a presenter on Talksport, and we're talking 15 years ago, we had no live rights. We were a sports broadcaster who immersed themselves in whatever the sporting narrative was. So we have a past of being able to cover sport without rights. This was a new challenge because this was sport without sport. So what it's done is it's created a great challenge to us as programmers. It's created a great challenge to our broadcast teams. But I likened it at the time to my background, as I'm sure you know, is newspapers. And I likened it to being one of those days I always quite enjoyed when you had the diary was blank and the pages were blank. You started the day as if you had nothing. And then throughout the day, you were looking to build and create and develop stories and to fill those pages. And that's what it's been like every day. It's been creating shows, developing narrative, really challenging our broadcasters to be at their best without the help of discussing a great sporting moment or certainly a recent great sporting moment. So it's not been without its challenges. But I think we know what our responsibilities are to our listeners, and right now that is to continue to inform, continue to entertain, and also to give them some escape, because actually some of the feedback that we get is don't give us too much news. We know where to get that. We can go to talk radio. We know where to go for our news. Give us something that allows us to escape from it, and give us something to make us smile. And that's what we've been trying to do.
So can you share with us some of the highlights from the past couple of weeks, where you think you've been doing that very well, and also if there's anything that you've tried out perhaps that didn't work so well?
I did an interview with a lady from the Financial Times, and she told me off, I think, for being too positive. But I did say at the time that it's my responsibility really to be creative, and to try to look beyond some of the challenges that clearly we all face, both in terms of our professional life and our personal life. And what we've tried to do, the challenge to the shows is, if people can't get to their clubs, if our listeners can't get to their football clubs or their sports clubs, then let's bring the sports clubs to them. So as official broadcast partners of the Premier League, for instance, we've been in touch with all of the clubs. We've been trying to liaise with them as broadcast partners to try to emphasise some of the good work they're doing in their communities. It's not fair to pick people out particularly, but I think Liverpool and Everton working together, Manchester United and Manchester City working together in their regions. And we've been promoting some of the work they've been doing in their communities in return for them giving us access to players for interviews. And during those interviews, we've done some things like we've had players reading out children's stories. We've had people talking about Joe Root, the England captain, was on today on To Breakfast and was talking about learning how to play the guitar. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to give our listeners insight into what's happening in the sports world. We have Bianca Walkenden on the weekend, who's a Taekwondo Olympic champion, and she was talking about clearing out a garage and using that as a place for exercise. And she was revealing some of the things she'd found in her garage while she was clearing it out. And so, just that level of insight. I've always thought, whether you work for newspapers, whether you work for radio, that providing insight into the lives of sportsmen and sportswomen is really important to do. And because no matter how good you are as a broadcaster or as a writer, you're not in that dressing room at 5 to 3, or in this case, you're not in that garage working out, trying to maintain your Olympic dreams when the Olympic and Paralympic movement has obviously had to cancel or postpone the games. So again, it's the same principle. It's provide us with insight, give us some kind of idea of what's happening in your life, share with us the challenges that you face. We're all facing challenges, whether that's working from home or families or whatever it might be, supporting our families. And so we're asking sportsmen and women to really give us that degree of insight into their lives too. And I find that our listeners are enjoying hearing how other people are missing sport, because we miss sport too. Our station, it's we care about it. It means a lot to us. It's obviously central to our planning. We're missing it. Our listeners are missing it, and it's important that we share the message that we're missing it together, really. And you say things that maybe haven't quite worked out, and clearly there are technical challenges that we've got rules in place about how close people can be within our studio, within our control room. And so often where we've got broadcasters working remotely, that's throwing up technical challenges. Hawksby and Jacobs are fabulous broadcasters and have been with Talksport for many years, but yesterday Andy Jacobs was sounding like Barry White because of some technical problems we were having with slowing the line down. But the listeners quite enjoyed it. They poked fun at us a little bit. We laughed along with them. We're not taking ourselves too seriously in that respect. So I think we're getting some leeway from the listeners. They're saying thanks very much for what you're delivering for us, and overcoming these technical challenges that we're having. And so thankfully they're so far few and far between.
So you just touched on obviously hearing from listeners and just them saying thank you for keeping going. What else sort of reaction have you had from them? Are they sort of suggesting things you could try? And also, have you sort of seen any change in audience figures if you see them this quickly over the past few weeks already, in terms of, are they sort of sticking with you? Are they coming to you more for escapism, or how are you seeing that?
Well, I think one of the things, I've been at Talksport now for 14 months. There's a huge loyalty from Talksport listeners. They really feel, we talk quite a lot about this. We don't want to feel like a club where you're exclusive and some people can come in and some people can't. We want to feel like a family where everybody feels that they're part of what we're trying to do. And Talksport has an incredibly loyal listenership. We know what our listeners are looking for, I hope, and we're trying to deliver that on a consistent basis. And, I think we get lifted when we get messaging back from our listeners. I had one particular quite a long emotional email sent from a chap down in Exeter who suffers from mental health and is stuck at home quite a lot anyway. And he sent a really heartwarming, uplifting message to say thank you for what you're doing for me. And I'm missing my sport. I need my sport. It's an important part of my life. And it's not here at the moment, but what you're giving me is something else. And I sent it around to all of our presenters. I sent it around to our production team, and for people who are dealing with challenges themselves in our working environment, because I just felt, to me, that was it hit me here. It was one of those. So we are providing that service, and we realise that right now sport isn't the most important thing in people's lives, and you see newspapers shrinking in terms of the pagination that they're able to commit to sport because of that lack of live sport out there. But radio still has a responsibility to provide the right messaging to our listeners. We're finding at Wireless that figures are up across Talk Radio and across Virgin as people are coming for both their news and also their escape with music. And with Talksport, we're doing a good job. I think we're finding that habits are slightly changing. People are coming into Hawksby and Jacobs in the afternoon because they know they get that escapism. Jim White's doing a fine job. He's a good journalist, Jim. And whereas normally you would have, as you'll know, your centrepiece of your programming is breakfast in the morning and drive in the evening around the commuting time. What we're finding is that people's habits are slightly changing. So we're still drawing large audiences into those shows, but also we're getting a stronger audience into mid-mornings, which is Jim White, and then H&J in the afternoon, as people are almost, it's almost as if, the messaging is, you can give yourself permission to come have a listen to us. Of course, you want to be around the coronavirus messaging and the really serious, important work that the news programs and news channels are doing, and the newspapers. But give yourself a bit of time off. Come and have a laugh with us for some time during the day, because we just need that level of escapism.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it for listeners. You touched on it in terms of people having to sit a certain distance apart, but I was wondering if practically, are there any other changes you've had to make? Do you have less people actually working on your programs at the moment, that sort of thing?
Yeah, we're splitting the teams because of that social distancing. I think it's, as I'm sure you know, control rooms in radio stations are not huge. So, let's say, like, for instance, a show like Breakfast, which probably has our largest team working on it. We've got people working remotely so that they can support the show, whether that's as an assistant producer or a remote producer working around guests. So we've definitely had to look at that. We've also, in terms of the amount of people that we have in our studios, sometimes where we've got shows that may have 3 people, for instance, we've got a limit on at the moment on a maximum of 2. And say, like, for instance, on Jim White's show, where he may have a Simon Jordan or a Martin Keown alongside him. Natalie Sawyer is currently working remotely from home. And so that is creating challenges for the teams. But like I say, I think that the audience are being really supportive and understanding if there may be a slight delay. I mean, like in our interview here, it's good to be able to see you. And sometimes when you haven't got that access, and if you're remote from somebody and you're answering questions, there may be a short delay, but we're doing a pretty good job. We had Ali McCoist onto Breakfast from Scotland today, and Laura Woods in our studio in London. And I think to the trained ear, you could tell that perhaps there were delays at certain parts of the show, but the chemistry and the warmth that exists between the two of them from working together over many years was evident. And I had a smile on my face throughout the show this morning, which is a good sign. They're doing their job well.
Definitely. If you're happy, then hopefully they're happy.
That's probably the most important thing.
Yeah. And so this has all happened quite quickly. You've obviously had to adapt pretty quickly. How far into the future are you looking at the moment in terms of your strategic thinking and that sort of thing? And yeah, just how far ahead or how immediate are you having to think?
Yeah, well, I think I see this as an opportunity, and we've got a lot of new shows that we're creating. Sam Matterface is one of our commentators, for instance, who would normally be around live Premier League matches that we're covering, is working from his home studio in Manchester. And we've got a new show that we're creating called Up Front With, which is taking, say, for instance, a number 9 like an Ian Rush or a Gary Lineker or an Andy Cole or an Ali McCoist, and people who have lots of strikers who score goals, create energy. I've noticed that when you talk to them, they talk about the art of goal scoring with such passion and a love for it, and a knowledge and a memory of some of the goals that they've scored. And so I noticed that quite early on, that if you bring goal scorers into shows, they have the biggest egos. It's almost like being the star actor in a film. These guys, they have great stories to tell. And so what we've done is we're creating a program called Up Front With a variety of different people, including some of those I've just mentioned, talking about their history with the number 9 on their back, what it meant to wear that number, the goals they scored, the partners they played with. And so none of this has gone out yet. And so we're creating shows that we can drop into our schedule whilst we're waiting for football to return. So we're not sitting around idle. We've got a couple of mental health shows that we're working on. We're going to drop in some mental health advice, because we've seen with partnerships we've had in the past with Samaritans, who enjoy working with us and we enjoy working with them. We were recently recognised with an area for our work with the Samaritans recently. We realised that getting that messaging out to people who are lonely and who are isolated is really important. So we're working around new shows. We've got a new cricket show that's going out at the moment, and guys have done a very good job around that with creating content that we're able to use across our shows. But let's be honest, we're all just waiting for football to return. That's the moment for us. what type of season are we going to have? I'm pretty convinced it is going to come back. I think you have to finish this season, and obviously that has to be at the right time with government support and the right messaging from the go ahead really from the NHS, who I'm sure we'll all agree are doing an incredible job in these circumstances. And once the green light is given for football to return, we'll have some terrific games, some terrific commentary. The commercial partners who we value hugely for the support that they've given us, and we look forward to working with them again going forward. So, like I say, goal scoring, whether you're talking about it referring to goals that have been scored previously or goals that happen in matches, create a buzz and an energy around shows that we're looking forward to that returning. And along with the football family and our broadcast partners, Premier League, Football League. We look forward with real interest to that coming back.
Yeah, that's completely understandable. And also, so at this sort of crazy, unprecedented time, you've just announced a big change to the breakfast show. So that's I assume that was already sort of scheduled in, but must be slightly crazy timing for Laura. But I assume you're all just sort of embracing it and giving it a go.
Did you say it was crazy? Well, look, again, that's just part of giving our listeners something new. We're not sitting still. We're working on taking it forward, and to take on your point, there was some plans in place. Laura Woods has been with us for a considerable period of time, and we're working towards her taking on that breakfast show from Monday to Wednesday, while still giving the listeners their feed of Alan Brazil, who you don't need me to tell you is a broadcasting legend, has been with the show for the best part of 20 years, and is part of the sort of heartbeat of Talksport. So we've come up with what we think is a good compromise, that we have Alan on Thursday and Friday in the chair, and so if you're missing Alan Brazil, he's still going to be around, folks. But if you want something new and fresh and innovative, then Laura Woods, who is an individual with a forensic knowledge of sport, particularly of football, is familiar to our listeners because she's been around our shows, particularly Breakfast. I thought it was a really nice touch where she paid tribute to Alan at the start of her first breakfast show, thanked him for all that he'd done to make her feel welcome at Talksport. And so, we feel it's the right time. We feel it's a good time to change. And, the listeners, Laura is very popular with the listeners. And so, what it does is it gives us a chance to have Laura in for 3 days, Ali McCoyson and around 2, who's also popular with our listeners, Alan Brazil on a Thursday and a Friday. And when football returns, what that does is we'll have a new breakfast show in place that people can tap into. And so I'm really impressed with the start they've made, and look forward to evaluating the first week once we've had 3 of Laura and 2 of Alan to see where we are.
Great. And I just wanted to touch on as well, last month, before all the craziness happened, it was the Sports Journalism Awards, and you guys were praised by the judges for making a number of innovative changes in the past year to diversify the audience and enhance credibility. Just wondered if you could sort of touch on what that involved over the past year.
Yeah, I think it was brilliant to be recognised for it. I've won a few SJ awards previously in my time in newspapers, and it's a real honour and a great privilege to win them. And this time it really felt like a great message to the team. I worked with some tremendous people, Laurie Palacio and Catherine Anastasi, who've been around Talksport for a long time. And when I took over last January, there was a real sense of desire to change, to be more reflective to our audience, really. I think, Charlotte, is probably the best way of describing it. I remember going to an evening where Stan Collymore was talking about lack of diversity in broadcasting. And it was a pretty brutal evening in many respects, because it taught me quite a lot. I learned from that there was a lot of change that we needed to look at and to consider, and we've continued to work on that area. And You know, if I look at people now like Laura in The Breakfast Show, Natalie Sawyer in from 10 till 1, Reshmin Chowdhury across our game day coverage, certainly across the last year, we've done a lot of good things, with a lot more things to come. You know, I've always felt, and I feel quite passionate about this, you choose somebody for the job because they're the best person for the job, they're the right person for the job, and certainly in the case of those three that I've just mentioned, that's the case. They're there because they're the best people for the job. But Talksport did need to undergo some changes, and we have done that, and I'm delighted that we've been recognised for it. But we'll continue to work at it, continue to look to make sure that we are that we're modern, that we're listening to our audience and delivering what the audience wants, whilst remembering that Talksport has been a great companion for many years to lots of people. They like the idea of being taken into the dressing room. They like the idea of the stories that perhaps aren't always shared from within dressing rooms. And you know, I've got some good friends who regularly inform me of what they expect and what they want from Talksport, and we try to deliver that on a consistent basis. And those awards, the SJ Awards and the Arias Awards, were a reflection that we're going in the right direction. And I'm privileged to be here. I feel proud to be here. And I'm hoping that when we come through this process and these challenging times, everybody is having to suffer, that people will be able to see that we are terrific broadcasters. And once we get our live sport back, we'll look to take that on.
And just finally on that, are there any sort of you know, growth plans or big changes or anything that A, you can tease, but B, perhaps you've had to put on hold because of this, and sort of you know, where are you hoping to be in a year's time after this? Yeah,
well, I think football will change, and we have to change with it. It'll be interesting to see how quickly this season is finished, and then obviously very quickly into next season. We lost the European Championships, as everybody did, from this summer, from our programming, from a commercial perspective. We had done a lot of work around that, and had some interesting signings lined up. That I guess what I expect to happen is for that to be postponed just until next summer when the European Championships come back round. You know, I'm keen to make sure that we have regularly existing Premier League players on, and for instance, recently people like Ben Foster, Andros Townsend have been very happy. Glenn Murray have been very happy to come on, and this was before the outbreak of coronavirus, and we're looking to continue that sort of thing because, again, you know, as I was saying earlier in the interview, giving us that level of insight into the dressing room. And these are intelligent guys who understand the passion for football and have a joy of talking about it. So we've been delighted to welcome those guys into our team. And so I don't see a lot of stuff being postponed or being put off. I continue to see us going forward. I would hope in the next couple of weeks we have a couple of interesting new signings to share. So watch this space on that. But I mean, you know, the challenge for me is to keep us at the top of the game. And even though we don't have any sport, there's so much to talk about. There's so many ways that we can entertain, so many ways that we can inform. And I'm hoping the shows continue to do that. That's the challenge for us.
Fantastic. Well, perfect place to end. Thanks very much, Lee. And
thanks, Charlotte.
yeah,
nice
good luck
to talk
with
to
it
you.
Thanks
very
a lot.
much. Bye-bye.
Bye.